If there's one thing I've learned about myself and the stories I like, it's that across all the different genres and plots I've seen, the one thing that always hooks me in are compelling characters. That so long as you have that key ingredient, it doesn't matter if we're going back in time to stop a gang from corrupting or just falling in love, you've already got my attention. Which is why, right before 2021 ended, I thought to myself there's one series in particular that I can't end the year without having watched. OddTaxi. OddTaxi is one of those series that I wish I hadn't waited to watch, because what started off as this unassuming story slowly built into this layered thriller that I regret not being able to be a part of the discussion as it happened in real time. Because anime as a culture has a big community aspect to it, and so any series that can leverage that and get people talking and discussing on the week-to-week are sure to be remembered fondly. Enter DRRR. Guys, let me tell ya, I watched DRRR for the first quarter of 2021 and have been waiting for my chance to make a video on it. And OddTaxi is the perfect opportunity, because despite how on the surface different the two appear, there is a very distinct vibe they both give off. It's that comparison that initially got me interested in OddTaxi, but I think over time what really piqued me was the ways OddTaxi managed to get that same vibe in the broad strokes, but diverged in the minutiae. DRRR is, on the whole, just a series about the city of Ikebukuro and its wild inhabitants, with each season/arc being about some sort of event which manages to evolve the entire city. For anyone who either watched it as it was airing or decided to give the first episode a watch, I would wager that one of the main aspects that got you watching more was the sheer insanity of the city. The episode centering on Mikado, on a welcome tour from his friend Kira, and lively is the city tonight. From the Van Gang and their fucking Spice and Wolf cutout, to this big black man named Simon of Russia Sushi, a man named Shizuo tossing I think that's a vending machine, and then there's these kidnappers who are intercepted by this headless black rider, who manifests this scythe and might have killed him. It's unclear. There is so much intrigue happening in DRRR's first episode that it's hard not to come back for episode 2 just to see what's going to happen with all these colorful characters. At first glance, the characters of OddTaxi certainly feel the same kind of crazy, with episode 1 cold opening on something being tossed to the bottom of the ocean, then cutting straight to Otokawa, our taxi driver, waking up in his taxi to radio news about a missing girl. And as he changes the station to a comedy duo's radio show, at first it's like, okay, yeah, that's good exposition. But then we spend a full ass minute just sitting there, driving around with him listening to the radio before yet another smash cut into a montage of the various characters set to the tune of an idol group's debut single, and it's so bizarre. Which is a feeling the rest of the episode keeps up as we start to meet some of the characters. From the hippo addicted to social media, the crooked cop dog, the lovesick monkey, and of course the slightly awkward Otokawa, the taxi walrus, who also has this air of mystery around him. I completely understand anyone who looked at this first episode and said, wow, DRRRR? That being said, as OddTaxi went on, I found myself making that comparison less and less. If we were to create a spectrum of crazy, while I don't think either show's characters are mundane, DRRRR definitely caps out the spectrum at absurd, where OddTaxi hits a relatively speaking mellower eccentric. The city of Ikebukuro is filled with people who are either high concept or straight up cross the line into fantastical. The fun deriving from learning more about the characters and bearing witness to the insanity. Why is this man throwing vending machines at this other guy? What does he mean when he says he loves humans, and what else will he try to do? And what's the deal with this headless shadow rider? It's how far removed these characters are from reality that fuels them. A few years ago, I met up with a friend, and he was an edge case anime fan, and he said something very interesting to me. He said, I have nothing against anime, but I also have no strong desire to watch it over live action shows. The reason I watch anime is for the shows that do things that live action can't. That is the itch that DRRR scratches. The kind of absurdity that makes you think, if I don't watch this specific anime, I may never find an experience quite like it. Which is funny, because I actually think that's the opposite of the appeal of OddTaxi characters. Setting aside the fact that a walrus is driving a taxi with a hippo in it, the characters in OddTaxi are much more grounded. They're eccentric, yes, and very much caricatures. But they're caricatures of real traits, personalities, and archetypes. I look at the animals in OddTaxi and I see people. The puma addicted to gacha games is my friend who's spent way more money on Genshin Impact than I'm comfortable sharing online. I know a gorilla doctor, someone who's both a mentor in my life and has my best interest at heart, and is also just a really good friend. The hippo addicted to social media and is chasing the high of going viral? Fuck, I went to high school with like 5 hippos. Despite being these exaggerations, they're still rooted in a realism that's captivatingly relatable. I look at the animals in OddTaxi and I see myself. The walrus has insomnia? I wrote this at 4:45 a.m. The monkey is down bad? Yeah man, join the club. The boar's who's struggling to chase his dreams while everyone else around him finds success? I get that. The appeal of OddTaxi's characters are that they're bizarre, but bizarre in a way that's still centered in a realism that's compelling. While OddTaxi creates that same sensationalism that DRRR relies on, especially in the plot surrounding them, the characters themselves are good characters because of how grounded and relatable they are. I can say pretty confidently that a large portion of people who watched OddTaxi were drawn in by its characters and their interaction. Whether it was the awkward walrus trying to understand this hippo's obsession with going viral, or his rabbit hole of a conversation with the gorilla doctor about Bruce Springsteen, the characters and their dialogue are something central to OddTaxi, and the people at OLM are well aware of this. There's this giraffe in the series named Satoshi Nagashima, and in the anime he's kinda nothing. Like, he comes up a few times in the Homo sapiens story, but on his own doesn't really amount to much. Which is fine, I don't think every character needs to be deep and complex if that's not what the story calls for. Well, come to find out, in between every episode of the anime, they posted an audio drama on their official YouTube channel. That was a podcast hosted by Satoshi about a radio frequency he picked up on a wiretapped item that ends up getting passed around the various characters, and we get to listen in on their conversation. And yeah, that absolutely backs what I just said, that OLM knows these character interactions are a part of what made OddTaxi special, but let's put a pin in that for just a moment. Isn't that so fucking cool? It's clear from the first audio log that the setup is about this lucky ballpoint pen, and that the pen is only lucky when you pass it on. And so what do we see hiding in plain sight in all the different episodes? Boom! So not only is there the audio drama, but it also manifests itself within the episodes as an Easter egg for those listening and a way to track its movements. That's so cool! To go above and beyond for something that a good portion of your audience isn't even gonna know about is just so cool to me. Whether you've seen OddTaxi and want more or haven't quite gotten into it yet, the audio drama is an absolute treat. And massive shout out to genericnostalgia on YouTube and Reddit for posting your own fansubs. For you to get this into the hands of people who normally wouldn't have access to it is incredible. Thank you so much. While characters between Durarara and OddTaxi are very different, I think if you were to drop the characters of Durarara into OddTaxi or vice versa, I still think the anime would feel different from their originals. That there's something more fundamental to each that separates them beyond the characters. Let's take a look at how exactly Durarara uses its crazy cast of characters. Going back to its first episode, the setup is clearly about Mikado settling into Ikebukuro as he learns more about all the people who lived there. But episode 2 completely subverts that with this whole new female narrator, and the plot focusing on Izaya, Ryo Kamichika, and the Black Rider. Episode 3 then blends these two things together, with Mikado roaming the city with Kita before running into Izaya. But then that's completely cut short by that, which itself is interrupted by him. Durarara's story is defined by its lack of commitment to a single main character, instead choosing to bounce around the different characters, with each perspective being a different piece to the larger puzzle of what the hell is happening. There is a story being told in Durarara, but its arcs don't necessarily unfold in a linear fashion, to the point where who the primary characters are, or what the central conflict even is, isn't really clear until the events are already well underway. I'd say Durarara's other defining feature is how Ikebukuro feels so alive, in large part because the characters are not only so insane, but so intertwined, creating such an interconnected web that you could go from one character to the next through just a few degrees of separation. Because Mikado just moved to the city and knows Kita, who's friends with Karota and the crew, and who frequent Russia Sushi owned by Simon, and he's really strong, to the point where we see him jump in and save Izaya from Shizuo, who's actually really good friends with Shinra, an underground doctor actually living with Celti, the Black Rider. And can you see how crazy this web of characters is? Because that's just the spoiler-free version. Shifting our gaze over, it's easy to see how OddTaxi checks a lot of these boxes. It's Tokyo full of animals, many of whom already know one another, leading to that same liveliness and interconnected feeling. To me, the episode most reminiscent of Durarara was episode 4, Tanaka's Revolution, which spends its whole run focused on the bizarre backstory of Tanaka, all building to a scene that was actually in the episode prior, wrapping up with the fallout of the situation as Tanaka becomes an important player in the story. However, this is really a one-off in terms of episode structure, the rest of the episodes varying from Durarara, and at the heart of that difference is the nature of the stories which each anime is trying to tell. In the case of Durarara, there is no single narrative being told, which isn't to say that the plots are meaningless or that nothing happens, just that there's not much you could say about Durarara's arcs in their entirety except that they're about the city of Ikebukuro, and these moments that end up involving most, if not all, the people who live in it. Whereas OddTaxi is more concerned with telling a specific, albeit multifaceted, tale that's much more focused in nature. And while you could definitely attribute that to the length of OddTaxi, being only 13 episodes long with an upcoming movie, as opposed to the Durarara's hefty 60-episode run. I think, more to the point, it comes down to the way in which each series tells their respective story. To demonstrate this, let's go back to that degrees of separation example I gave earlier. While I created this connections chart for DRRR, you can actually find an official OddTaxi one on their website. And looking at these two side by side, that the difference becomes clear. DRRR's characters are more interconnected across the board, lending itself to the story being more broadly about the entire city of Ikebukuro, where OddTaxi, while it does tell the story of Tokyo, the plot has a clear protagonist and focal point, which brings together so many of the disparate pieces. Odokawa, the taxi driver. Rather than taking the DRRR approach of bouncing the spotlight around its various characters, OddTaxi tells the bulk of its story through the lens of Odokawa, as he meets and interacts with the various characters through his taxi. And trust me, I didn't just spend the last 16 minutes just to say that OddTaxi has a protagonist and DRRR doesn't. But it's that difference that is indicative of what separates the two. On one hand, you have DRRR, whose stories aren't just about one person, but the entire city of Ikebukuro, where all the absurd inhabitants clash and connect. And so the storytelling reflects that by bouncing around the different high-concept characters, slowly revealing the entire picture from all the various angles. Like peeling the world's most complex banana. On the other hand, there's the story of OddTaxi, which itself is really the story of Odokawa, as all the eccentric animals of Tokyo live their crazy lives, with Odokawa being the through line which intertwines them, the plot using him to more linearly unravel the focused plot, as the mystery unravels with it. Like unrolling the world's most complex fruit roll-up. What a stupid analogy. If there's one thing I can say about DRRR and OddTaxi, it's that they clearly stand out. Like, for example, there's this new series on Jump called Dororon. And here's the plot in its most basic and reductive. Young boy spends his whole life wanting to save people by demon killing, but realizes that he actually has zero innate ability for demon killing. But his fighting spirit and raw physical potential has him keep trying as he harnesses the power of a demon to fight demons. And I think there's probably a handful of you who are saying, "Oh, Sumami, you got that mixed up. That's actually Jujutsu Kaisen or Black Clover or that's Naruto." And you're right, and so am I, because it's all of the above. And I'm not here to make a judgment call on whether Dororon is good or not, because it's really far too early. Nor am I trying to say that works that are a bit derivative or follow tropes are inherently bad. I genuinely thought Jujutsu Kaisen deserved to win Anime of the Year. Once. Crunchyroll. But what I can say about Dororon is that when I read that first chapter, I was so unenthused. I would only go on to read chapter 2 for the sake of reading chapter 2. And even then, I don't think I finished the second chapter before my ADHD brain decided that playing Super Auto Pets would be more engaging. And again, please don't take this as an indictment of Dororon, but rather, let's pivot back to our main point, that DRRR and OddTaxi, whether it be from the absurdity of its characters or the charm of their eccentric relatability, stick out in a sea of Dororons, and get you to watch more, not because you think the story might get interesting, but because the story is interesting and you want to find out more. It's the characters that grab you, and then their storytelling that keeps a tight grip. DRRR and OddTaxi don't just have good characters, but have worked them into the plot in such creative ways that make them truly feel one of a kind. Thank you.